Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Eurodiena. We are past the Eurovision season now, but summer is just starting, and we start looking forward to the next year. So before we do that, let's reflect a bit. Let's talk about what went down in Malmö and what we can expect from Eurovision and Lithuania at Eurovision in the future. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, and I'm very honored to have you here. Please welcome Alesia Michelle.
Hi.
Alesia, could you briefly introduce yourself to perhaps those viewers who haven't seen you before?
Hi, I'm Alesia Michelle. I am a U.S. East Coast based Eurovision blogger. I started out in radio, have worked at different fan sites, and have had my channel for almost 10 years at this point. We're like reaching the home stretch, but we could say 9 years I've had my YouTube channel all about Eurovision.
So you really know what you're talking about, and you have some notes for performances for the organization. And today, I think we will mostly focus on Lithuania because that's the topic of this video. And thank you again for coming. So I know you covered this extensively in your recent live streams. But again, for some people who may have not seen them, could you briefly share your impression on the results of this year's contest?
I mean, ultimately, we have to give it up to our winner, Nemo. Switzerland has, I guess we could say, done it again, but it's been a while since they did it. So I think the ending of it all, I am happy with. I was curious about how the juries would show up this year because in the national selections, I felt like the international juries were kind of all over the place. But it did seem like once we were at Eurovision, the jury sort of had a focus. And I do think that they gave shine to a lot of the entries that we thought they would. I think they rewarded things that were a little bit daring. I think they rewarded things a little bit out of the box. But I think that they also rewarded songs that were well executed ultimately. And so when I talk about the execution, the whole package, the vocal, the staging, the styling, how well are they using the technology? And then I would say with the televote, I think the televote scores sort of tracked, I think, what we saw last year. And I do think I am still team keep the jury out of the semifinals. I do think our qualifiers for the semifinals were all great songs, and I think they made sense. I don't think we had a ton of, I would say, surprises that maybe felt undeserving perhaps, or unpredictable. So I think if you're looking at the scores and you're looking at the trends for someone like me, I feel like, okay, I think I've still got a little bit of a pulse on what will pop and what won't. But I'm always waiting for the year where I look at the results and I go, oh, I'm surprised by that. I'm waiting for that year. And I don't think we got that this year.
Yeah, but you did mention the final results, and if we look at the split between the jury and the televote, although the final result, as you say, it does make sense ultimately. But what about the how would you address maybe this issue that some people may have with the winner of the overall contest coming fifth in the televote, which is basically the situation we had last year, but just exaggerated now because as surprisingly as it may sound to some, Nemo had even a larger margin than Loreen had in the jury score.
I think the challenge with that is, well, how would you fix it? By telling the juries you have to like spread out your points more equally? That wouldn't work. How would you fix it? All the juries have to confer. So then you've got this massive group of people kind of conferring together and figuring out how they can make it fair. I can understand the critique, but I haven't really heard a viable solution that I think would actually work in practice. When Switzerland's song first came out, I mean, that song, just as a composition on paper, it was daring, it was ambitious. And the fact that they were able to get on the stage and execute it flawlessly, no bum notes, has to be rewarded. And I think that that margin with the jury made sense. And I think where some folks might have thought, because if we look at like France being the runner up with the jury, some folks go, okay, well, France might have won it. Here's the thing, France as a composition on paper was not as ambitious as what Switzerland had put together. So again, I think it is challenging and it's fair to have critiques. But if you're going to have the critique and hold on to it dearly, you've got to figure out what the solution for it is. And I've just not really heard a solution that will move us into a place where that doesn't happen. And although I was actually thinking this year was going to be a year where the overall televote winner was going to be able to win, that's not what happened. Um, but I do think we run into, well, I'm like a 60-40 person, so I should probably just
Okay.
say that. I really feel like the televote should have 60% of the weight and then the jury having 40%. If that was the case, we would have ended up with Croatia winning and Baby Lasagna winning, which I would have been okay with.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so it would have been a different winner. But the fact of the matter is, I still am okay with Nemo and Switzerland winning. It was one of my favorite songs this year. So perhaps I'm biased. And maybe what I need to have happen is for a song that I really, really detest to win. Maybe that is the way that that my mind will be expanded and I will be able to think of more solutions. But I don't know what one does. And I think ultimately, if the winner is deserving, how much protest can we really do, if that makes any
Yes.
sense?
Yes, I see. I kind of agree, I think, with most what you said. But moving on to the other results, because you talked and people talked about, the winners and the top five and everything else a lot. But today we want to touch upon Lithuania. And let's be honest, I think most of us were quite confident with what Silvester was bringing to Malmo. And I know you were as well. I don't think you had many notes for his performance. So I think at least here in Lithuania, a lot of people did expect the final result, to be a bit different, and I mean a bit more positive. And by that I mean we were expecting a top 10 finish, uh, safely, I would say. But I'm thinking maybe we were biased. Maybe it wasn't even reasonable to expect that. How do you see it as someone from a side?
Well, to be fair, I could have seen Lithuania coming a bit higher. I just full disclosure, I would have been fine with that. I think it could have made sense. I, I think that Lithuania gave something really good, slick, and polished this year. Here's the thing that I think might have hurt the entry a little bit, and I talk about this on my channel a lot, is we have to think of like your direct competition, because there's a little level of, if this is all for the same demographic, they're gonna kind of, we call it like kind of cannibalize each other
Yeah.
a little bit, and not to be so like, I don't know, that's such a visceral and visual word. So not that intense, but a little bit of that. And we knew it was going to happen with the pop girlies. And I had said I had my queer quintet, the queer quartet. If we were just focusing on on like kind of, I'd say that like cool synth pop, a little bit vibe, electro pop vibe. So I think that that might have been what ultimately hurt Lithuania, was potentially that direct competition, but I was happy to see it still finish top 10, which I do think this was
With
one
the
of,
televote.
with the televote. Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
And well, overall, Lithuania overall finished 10th,
No,
right?
Lithuania overall finished 14th.
Wait, really?
Yes, that's the issue, right?
No. Okay. No, overall I could have. Okay, so then yeah, no, I've been living in my fantasy land that it's still finished top 10.
Yeah,
This is my
he
post
did
Eurovision
finish in the televotes top
in the
10, but the
televote.
juries, I think, I don't remember the exact scoring.
Let's see.
I think, yeah, 17th with the jury. I don't see. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I fail to see how.
Yeah, no, I'm not really feeling that. But again, I do think anything that hurt the performance was um I- was really the direct competition, I think, if we want to look at that. And
Yeah.
arguably I think you could have even put the eventual winner in that same category. Not really, but I could see people doing it.
Yeah. And another idea we had floating around was the running order. Obviously, it's the beginning of the show, but again, we had the new voting system,
Hmm.
so that shouldn't really make much, impact. But Lithuania did have to perform right after Israel, and we know that was quite polarizing. And allegedly, some people, turned off their TVs during the performance, and so on and so forth. Do you think that could be an somewhat of an influence to the result, or not really?
Short answer, no. So looking at the results and looking at the overall placement of everybody, I mean, I do sort of feel like if you kick off the show with Marcus and Martinez,
Yeah.
coming with that very slick staging. I wouldn't necessarily call their song like electro pop in the cool way that kind of Silvester Belt was serving it, but it's still pop.
Yeah.
And they were doing so much,
Yes.
Marcus and Martinez visually. And although I think Lithuania still had a very, very slick show, I think there are some times where it's like, I wouldn't, if I was like the Lithuanian delegation, I wouldn't take these results too hard. You
Okay.
qualified, you had one of like the more notable entries this year. It was delivered well. Sometimes it's like, I think some countries overcorrect, and I think Lithuania, y'all are on a nice path. So I wouldn't really overcorrect anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. I think people are happy. um, and talking about, as we talked about the full package, what do you think is a successful performance in general? Like, if there was a checklist, what would you say are the essential marks that you have to put in that checklist to have a successful performance? Is there even a checklist?
Well, there's definitely a checklist. But I would say you really got to make sure that it's something you can execute. So, starting off, yes, this is the Eurovision Song Contest. So, if you're looking at that song, there are things that I think help it. Having a vocal moment, having something that's catchy. I call it sticky, something
Yeah.
that people just can't kind of get away from it. It sort of follows them throughout their day and throughout the show. So ultimately, just as a composition, before you even bring the song to life, you got to kind of think of, well, what's my vocal moment going to be? And that doesn't have to be like a high note or anything like that, but it has to be something impactful sonically in the
Yeah.
song. Then you have to figure out how do you make it catchy. So I think there's that. And then there's that je ne sais quoi, like what is going to set you apart from everybody else this year? Like, what can you do sonically that will be contrasting to something else, or maybe feels like, oh, we've never heard anything like this before? So you got to think that way. And then I do think it helps to be mirroring the trends. I don't think you have to be completely on trend where it's like this sounds like a radio song that we'd listen to right now, because ultimately when that song is recorded and like produced, who knows what's going to be popping that May,
Exactly.
So I think if you're just following like, well, what's popping on the radio, that's going to hurt you a little bit. You got to push it beyond that. Then you have to think about, what's my styling going to be? You got to think about the execution. Can this be vocally executed flawlessly? And then I think from there it's a little bit about the performer, the charisma. What's the personality? What energy are they kind of bringing to the stage? So that's like another bucket that I think is a little bit je ne sais quoi. But I do think there are some objective buckets that one, and check boxes, if you will, that one can make sure that they're checking, so that entry is, I think, in a better position than maybe some others on the stage.
Yeah, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking maybe when you look at Looktalk as a song, maybe it did lack that vocal moment. Not necessarily like a vocal moment, but something for the juries, maybe something for them to be like, oh, let's reward this a little bit more.
Or even if it wasn't in the song, what innovative thing are you doing on the
Yeah.
stage? the juries can be satiated not just from vocals. I think when people hear these like vocal pieces, they're like, oh, the jury will eat it up. I'm like, not if the staging is crap or, there is no staging. They need a little bit of a show,
Yes.
and they will penalize those that don't really give too much of a show.
And to touch upon this, do you think a budget is needed for a good show? Because I was looking, especially at the jury scores in the past few years, and if we look at Nemo, at Lorien, um, even Sam Ryder,
Hmm.
he did win the jury, right? They all
Yes.
had some sort of prop on stage. There was something more than just a performer, you know? Do you think that impacts their scoring?
Well, I do think budget can help because it can allow you to hire maybe a creative director that actually knows what they're doing on the stage, or you end up like Australia, who had no staging.
Yeah.
Um, but jokes. But I mean, I don't think it's everything because I mean, if we think about it, Norway had budget, Finland's stage show had budget,
True.
Austria had budget, but they didn't fulfill those other check boxes.
Yeah.
Austria was not giving us a vocal. If we want to talk about Norway, Norway maybe was just a tad too out of the box sonically. For jurors, I don't agree, but there you go. Finland, I mean, there was the vocal actually did improve, but I mean, the song as a composition was nothing to call home about. Or maybe it was something to call home about. There is a man, and I can see the hair on his butt on my stage, on my TV screens. What is going on? Someone rescue me. Maybe.
Yeah. Um, so going back to Lithuania and what we just talked about, um, and moving a bit from this year's performance and looking at the perspective of the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, what do you think is the greatest weakness that Lithuania, you know, has, and how could we overcome this weakness?
I'm not going to lie, I don't love the format of your national selection.
Yeah.
I think what is hurting Lithuania ultimately is the fact that it is long, and some people go, oh, well, it's not as long as this one, but y'all allow things that other national selections don't allow their artists to do. And it's the tweaking.
Yeah.
It's the tweaking along the way because as much as I was convinced by Shudo, um, that was not the best song out of the national selection. And I think people were won over by how the song kept improving and forgot you already had something that was fine and good and might have gotten you a little bit further on the Eurovision stage potentially. And I think that that has happened previously. So I'm just using, last year as an example, but I think that that has happened in the past where instead of going with the thing that's just good and gives you that impact, because the artists are allowed to change the clothes, change the song, tweak even the hook and chorus of the song to where it really does emerge and evolve, I think that that can hurt it because ultimately at Eurovision we're about making first impressions and people aren't going to be going on that same journey that you all as a public have gone on. And I would also argue that I think there might need to be, and I think this for most national selections, so this is not just a Lithuanian thing. I think most national selections really need to revisit um how do I put this? Who is on that first table of selectors to even decide what songs need to be in the final show? Because,
I think this applies to Croatia very well, right?
correct, because like we saw with Croatia, Baby Lasagna was left on the shelf.
Yeah.
So I think for most national selections, you should be looking at that table of people who are doing the first line evaluations.
Yeah. And that's perhaps most difficult to see from the outside because we don't ever really know who does we know there's a committee or something, but it's never really emphasized that much in the public, so there's
Yeah.
not much we can do as the viewers, but only hope that the delegation will take a look at this video. and listen to what we have to say. And
Yes.
another, you mentioned Chuto Tuto and Monica's entry, and you also touched upon that it was a good entry, but perhaps I would dare to say that this year we had a stronger entry than Stay was. And
Yes.
I think many people would agree. But again, when you look at the scores, and we cannot compare them because obviously these are different years and different contexts, but still, Chudoduto got higher, and they did get higher mostly because of the jury scores. And it got me thinking that when I look at the televote in the past, let's say, few years, the televote is quite stable. And it's always stable with, I would say, diaspora and friends. So that would be UK, Ireland, Norway for the diaspora group, and then Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, our friends who support us when we send something decent, at least. Um, that made me thinking maybe we should really focus on finding a jury friendly song, because maybe jury is something that could be the, what's the word, the booster into the
I
top
wouldn't
part of the
do
scoreboard.
that anytime soon because the
Okay.
jury is still on the barbecue a little bit, and we're still sauteing and filleting them for a lot of the decisions
Yes.
that they've made. I think they got a little bit of a gold star this year. We've set them on the side of the barbecue, but we're ready to put them back on. We haven't put them in the fridge. They're not in the shelf or anything like that. So I wouldn't probably go that route. But again, I think this year was just stronger. You already said it yourself. The combo of songs this year was stronger. So yeah, Monica was able to get higher, but last year wasn't that strong of a year. This year was definitely stronger in terms of quality.
So the last question would be, if the Lithuanian delegation called you tomorrow and said, look, Alesia, give us 3 pieces of advice for 2025, and we will do as you say, and you have the power to decide, what would you reply to them?
Well, it's hard because I do think Lithuania is on the right track. Some countries need a whole shakedown and makeover. And so I wouldn't want my advice to deter too much. So that's my disclaimer. But I would say the first thing I would say is why don't you all decide to make your national selection, the national selection, because with all the semis you have, where then they get to, like, people get to vote for maybe the final four. And then from there, with the final four, you look across at the four options for artists and potential songs that you have. And then maybe wait 2 weeks and see how the competition is stacking up. Maybe go in the lab, kind of tweak those songs as best you possibly can. And then out of those four, pick the one that you feel like has the least amount of direct competition at that point in the pre Eurovision season, the strongest song. And then from there, send them to Eurovision. And I would say, let's make sure that Silvester is in the delegation and able, I would say, and able to talk to and kind of consult, because I think Sylvester has really amazing taste as an artist and put together a wonderful stage show, and also, deserves to have this Eurovision experience, I would say, do over, but from a position of being a little bit of a mentor. And that would be my advice.
Thank you so much, Alesia Michelle, for coming, um, joining us today, and for sharing your thoughts. And again, I hope that next year we can, maybe use some of your advice. I mean, the delegation
Maybe.
thing. And
I want to go to Lithuania,
yes,
okay? I want to
let's
go
make you
there.
come here. Let's make you come here. Let's win Eurovision so you can be here.
Yes,
And
yes. I think
yeah,
Lithuania is going to win soon, too. I should just say that. I
okay.
do think Lithuania is winning Eurovision soon.
That's good to hear, and I think people will love this. So I hope that that soon is sooner rather than later. And once again, for our for all our viewers, go follow Alesia Michelle. Subscribe to her channel if you haven't done that already, and if you want to hear from her more. And once again, thank you for being here today. And hope maybe talk to you next year after another result,
Yeah.
after another Eurovision.
Yes. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Labas, jei patiko šis video, spausk like, share ir subscribe, padėk mums augti Contribui platformoje.